But I mean, I don't want to like give this picture that we were like in the heart of East Oakland because I don't want anyone to,
Our street was nice.
go and buy a house there and be like, what were they talking about? We were very much on the border. It was in Maxwell Park. It wasn't, the East Oakland you see on TV. So I also want to be clear about that because I don't want to lead people astray. I'm not taking responsibility for that.
It was like 4 streets down International Boulevard. If anyone knows what that's at, enough said.
Yeah, so. Hello, family, and welcome back to our first episode of the new year. I know so many of us are excited that 2020 is behind us, but my husband and I did want to take stock of some of the good things that happened last year, and one of them, as you can tell from the title, was how we were able to turn our $25,000 investment into $250,000.
$250,000. So we were a little hesitant about getting too in detail, but we realized after some reflecting and some good feedback that it can be super helpful for others, can definitely be motivational and show that it is actually doable, and also can help dispel the myth that when you buy a home, it's permanent, you can't move, and actually shows the value of how quickly things can really improve financially for you. So hopefully you find it helpful.
Okay, so to start with some context, so we'll have a little story time. So LeVar and I moved to the Bay Area in 2015, right after we got married. I had accepted a job there, and he was able to transfer his work location at the time. For those of you who are not familiar with the Bay Area, it's like one of or the hottest market for real estate. It has one of the highest costs of living in North America, again, if not the highest. So it was a really huge move from us, formerly being, in Southern California, to like make that leap financially. So of course we started out renting. We were in a really popular neighborhood in Oakland, walking distance to Lake Merritt, which is like a scenic area in Oakland. Our rent there was about $3,000 a month, which again was really hard on my husband because prior to moving to the Bay Area, he had a home in Southern California, and so that rent we were paying was actually more than his mortgage.
Almost double. Actually, it was double.
Yeah, so that was really frustrating. We had a 12-year lease, and even though I had 6 figures in student loan debt, we kind of made a decision early on that we would focus on getting a down payment together for the house because the interest rates for my loans, I believe, were low enough to where it made sense to not try and pay off that and then try and reverse and save for a house, because the way that the real estate market was going, we would be priced out like really quickly.
So people ask us all the time how we were able to finance our first home in Oakland. And there's 2 options typically when you buy a home. You can either go the conventional route, which is roughly about 20% down of the actual price of the house. And there's also an FHA route, which is only 3.5% down. FHA program was pretty much created after the 2008 financial crash, when people started pretty much defaulting on their mortgages. FHA program is specifically beneficial for those that have high income and not a huge down payment or a lot of cash reserve. So it made sense for my wife and I to go that route.
So we stayed for those first 10 months, I remember, because we had to break our lease and like find new renters. And it was just like this whole thing to avoid having to like pay the last 2 months. But anyway, we were able to get together $25,000 because the home we ended up purchasing was $670,000, and we did the FHA first home buyer loan program because again, the house in Southern California was in my husband's name, and so I technically was a first time home buyer, and so we were able to use my name to get this house, and then we only had to put how much down? 3.5%?
Yeah, 3.5%. So 3.5% of $670,000 was around like $23,000. So
yeah,
$25,000. Now, the pro of FHA homebuyer program is that you only have to put down a low amount. So $25,000 in comparison to the actual loan is a pretty low amount. The con is that your mortgage every single month is going to be a lot higher. So as my wife mentioned, we made good money at the time, but we were just low on cash. So it made sense for us financially to do so. So our
Well, to
mortgage.
be clear, when we say low on cash, we mean like a reserve. So he didn't have a huge savings because I had just started working. So prior to that, it was like one income we were living off of, and I was in school. And so with the FHA, you only have to put, again, the little 3.5% down versus the 20% conventional loan. And our monthly income was high enough to, the mortgage payments were not a big deal, but we just didn't have that reserve built up over time. So I just wanted to clarify when we say we're short on cash
Yeah.
because, yeah, you have to have a high income technically.
Yeah, and I actually ended up pulling money out of like an old. I was working at JP Morgan Chase at the time, pulling some money out of an old 401k to get the money to that $25,000. So
Mhm.
we were really kind of buckled down and pulled money where we could.
Yeah.
But our mortgage ended up going up to $4,500 a month. Because there was also what the FHA is called PMI, which is private mortgage insurance. And that's pretty much a safety net for those since the 2008 financial crash. They have these policies in place to make sure if you do default on a loan, they do have some kind of capital to hopefully offset that loss.
Yeah. The bank.
Exactly. So typically it'd probably be around 4,000, but with the PMI, it jumped up to $4,500. So in that $500, you can't deduct on your taxes. It's literally just a payment that you would pay like an HOA essentially. So it does add up quite a bit over time.
Yeah, but in our experience with this generation and our college friends, a lot of us have high income, but we also have high expenses with like student loan payments and just being first generation graduates, first time home buyers. So we don't have the capital to do the 20% conventional loan. So the FHA loan program was like really helpful for us.
So with FHA loan, with the private mortgage insurance, that $500 does add up over time. So the cool thing about FHA loans is that you can actually refinance out of that loan and remove that private mortgage insurance. So because of the pace that real estate in the Bay Area was moving at that time, I was pretty confident that our property would appreciate in value to pretty much meet the threshold to refinance. And the threshold is once your outstanding loan balance is 80% of the home's actual value. So again, we bought at $670,000. Within a year, it actually appreciated to like $750,000 to $800,000. So immediately I emailed our loan officer and said, let's refinance, let's get this off. And we were able to do so successfully. So that threw away the $500 and dropped our mortgage down to $4,000, which again is a lot. But in comparison, we were already paying $3,000 for a smaller apartment. So again, it just made sense over time.
Yeah.
We also bought in East Oakland, which it was a hot area. I mean, Oakland in general is very hot, but East Oakland was, you got to be a little comfortable to kind of live in that area. Thankfully, we had no issues during our entire time there. But because we were just comfortable living in that area, we were able to get a great deal on a property with no bidding wars. And thanks to some amazing real estate agents, we were able to get in there like right at ask. So that's how that panned out.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to like give this picture that we were like in the heart of East Oakland because I don't want anyone to
Our street was nice.
go and buy a house there and be like, what were they talking about? We were very much on the border. We were right next to a women's university, so it was in Maxwell Park. It wasn't the East Oakland you see on TV. So I also want to be clear about that because I don't want to lead people astray. I'm not taking responsibility for that.
It was like 4 streets down from International Boulevard. If anyone knows what that's at, enough said.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway.
But yeah. So as we mentioned, our mortgage was high at the $4,000, but thankfully there are a lot of key benefits that come with that mortgage, specifically for your primary residence. So when you buy a property, a lot of times the initial payment is going to be majority interest because it's over a 30-year period. So of that $4,000, a huge portion of that is going to be able to be write off on our taxes. So thankfully we're able to do that.
Yeah. Which is big because we don't have kids and we have, a higher income. And so if you're in a certain tax bracket with like no dependents, then you have no write-offs. Even for like my 6 figures, we were paying on my student loans, like you can write any of that off. Correct. So this was it.
on top of our rental properties as well.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, so that was huge. And of course, when you're renting, you don't or you're not able to utilize any of that. So all those
Mhm.
benefits go directly to your landlord.
Yeah, and them coming out, once a quarter to change your light bulb is not, a reasonable trade-off, so
Exactly. So we were able to justify the $4,000.
yeah, certainly.
And yeah,
And again, especially because we were in a city where the rents were
correct.
astronomically high as well. So it's not like we're in, the country somewhere, right, and paying like $800 in rent, and then all of a sudden we're going to take on this $4,000 mortgage. Like, of course, that doesn't make sense. And in that instance, the trade off, for your landlord to do everything for you would make sense. You'd have so much cash surplus. But yeah, living in the Bay Area, if you're able to and you can get the FHA loan or maybe even qualify for the conventional loan, we definitely recommend owning versus renting out there.
Correct. I think the average rental price in Oakland is like $3,000.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do what you want.
So another thing that we hear that deters people from wanting to buy a home is just the expense of it, right? So on top of the mortgage, if anything goes wrong, your light goes out, the heater, the furnace, whatever, that's on you. You can't just like call your landlord and have them come on site and fix it. But for us, that was never really a big issue. I don't know if we got lucky or what, but we had bought a 1910 craftsman in Oakland. And so that's like, what, over a century old.
Essentially.
It was not a new home. It looked good. It was upkept, but through that 4.5 year period that we lived there, we only had to replace the furnace once. That was expensive. That was $4,000. But again, you can't not have heat in the Bay Area.
You can,
Um,
but depending upon who you are. I mean, space heaters and quilts and blankets go a long way, but
Anyway, if this is an investment and you're gonna sell it later, you'd have to fix it at that point. So fix it and
exactly.
enjoy it. We replaced, or the water heater had a leak, so we got that patched up. That was $150. And then our roof we had to patch at one point. That was $300. So all in all, that's like less than $4,500 over the 4 year duration, like $1,000 a year upkeep. That's not bad, especially when you're looking at it like the investment that it turned out to be for us. So I don't think like the expense should scare people because yeah, it just didn't turn out to be like a nightmare for us. And then second, once you have a home, presumably you have some type of savings or reserve. And so as long as you're putting money aside on a regular basis, when something comes up, it isn't, gonna kill whatever you have going on financially because you kind of like prepared for it along the way.
So as my wife said, I definitely think we were blessed or lucky to not have any major expense. But I do want to call out that when you buy a home, you actually have what's called an inspection prior to you actually solidifying that home. So the inspection report tells you pretty much everything that's wrong with the property in terms of any kind of major wear and tear. So that's usually how you're able to avoid any like major lemon because you can
Mhm.
actually back out if you do find a major flaw in the property. So do keep that in mind. Because aside from that, again, maybe like little things like light bulbs, we're talking maybe $200 over the course of our entire time there. It adds up, but it's again a very minuscule cost. So how did you get to the $250,000? That's the big question. So gonna throw a lot of numbers at you, so bear with me here. So we ended up selling our house this year for $935,000. Again, we bought it for 670. Keep that in mind. We ended up upgrading our roof, as we mentioned, we had a leak, and as well as upgrading our kitchen. But thankfully, we were able to impact that cost into a zero-free loan that our real estate agents were able to give us, and we're able to just take that off of the pretty much price of the home. So take that out along with of course, the commission that comes along with the real estate agent, and the net came out to be $250,000. Cool thing about the primary residence is that you don't pay capital gains if you live there for a certain amount of time. So as long as the proceeds aren't over $250,000 for individual or $500,000 for a joint
Mhm.
partnership, you don't pay any capital gain taxes, which means you have that just sitting in your account and you pretty much flip your initial down payment into that net amount.
Right. So, if you can't tell, we're really trying to drive the point home that investing in real estate as your primary residence does not have to be viewed as any other investment you make. You will not find a greater return in the stock market or just really with any other type of investment that you can think of.
For sure.
Definitely not any type of, 401k or, yeah, none of that. Like, this is going to be, especially in a city like or cities like the Bay Area. So yeah, and on top of that, like it can't be taken for granted that you have a place to live. So
Exactly.
yeah.
So usually with investments, you're assuming like that money is going to be put away. You're not actually going to be benefiting from it until it actually gets a return. With
Mhm.
of course, property, you are benefiting from it every single day. You're
Yeah.
living here.
Yeah.
We're doing nothing aside from what we would normally be doing,
Yeah.
just living.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's not something where it's like a permanent commitment. Like we were only there from July 2016 to when did we sell? September?
It's
Or
November,
November?
like
Oh,
it's November.
November 2020. We actually moved prior to that, like in August or whatever. Anyway, but yeah, so November 2020. So that's like, I don't know, a year or 4 years,
4 years.
4 months. I
Yeah,
don't
4
know.
years.
So yeah, it doesn't have to be some like permanent daunting thing. Like, yeah, you can still travel, you can still have disposable income for like other things, you can still make additional investments. Like I just hear so many things online in particular where it makes it seem like home ownership, first off, is unattainable, and then second is something that you should be doing when you're like 40 and that you should enjoy your youth. And it's just like, to me, I don't see how those things,
Yeah,
can't coexist.
exactly.
Yeah.
As long as you're able to hold the mortgage, that's going to be most important. Because to kind of speak on how you mentioned in terms of investments, so an average stock market return is like around 10%. So if you took that same $25,000 and everyone says, "Oh, I can invest it," so if you put it in the stock market and got that average return over 4 years, you're looking at roughly $36,000. So in comparison
Yeah.
to $25,000 turning into $250,000, which is about 1,000% return. Of course, no one can predict that, but
Yeah.
typically speaking,
Yeah.
that's a much more strategic way to do things.
Yeah, of course you have to buy in like not necessarily even like the hottest area,
It's just an up and
but
coming developed area that you
yeah,
see potential in.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So we can't take for granted that we bought in the Bay Area, so we
for
kind of
sure.
had a guarantee. But I mean, there's a lot of other hot areas, particularly in California, in the East Coast. Yeah,
And even if it doesn't transcend to 1,000% return, I
yeah,
mean, even if it's 500% return or
yeah,
even 100% return, that's
yeah,
still a much better return you're going to get in any
yeah,
other investment vehicle out there that's legal.
yeah.
So keep that in mind.
And just another example of how we were able to benefit from, owning versus renting in a major city. If we would have stayed in our apartment and continued to pay that $3,000 rent over the course of 4 years, we would have paid down someone else's mortgage in the tune of, what was that, $145,000. Whereas over that time, we paid down our own mortgage and again had a return on our initial investment of $250,000. And it's not like one of these things that you can avoid. Like anywhere you live, you have to pay rent unless you're fortunate enough to stay at home with your parents. But yeah, so it's one of those things where it's just like, okay, you have to pay to live somewhere. You might as well, if you're able to, pay for yourself. And again, we never want to come across as telling anyone what to do with their money. But for those of you who are on the fence or are indecisive about whether or not you can take the plunge into home ownership, whether it's for you or you should, like my husband said, as long as you can take care of that mortgage, there's no reason why it shouldn't be for you. Yeah, particularly dependent on the area, but yeah, it really can be for everyone if you can take care of that mortgage.
Definitely. And in terms of the area, you can definitely look up like properties in a particular area and see
Mhm.
like the trajectory of how well they've been appreciating. So
Yeah,
we did that before we bought as well, saw
yeah,
that the prices were going very quickly. So we
mhm,
wanted to get in sooner rather than later. So
yeah.
it's not a guessing game. You can kind of tell based on history how things are pretty much progressing.
Yeah, and you could always, yeah, have a consultation with a realtor for
Correct. Yeah.
free who will
There's
tell you
professionals.
the same. Yeah, if you don't trust yourself through the research, and yeah, of course they're going to be willing to work with you and take the meeting because they work off a commission. So yeah, find a real estate agent you can trust and sit down and have the same conversation about how the market's going and when and where you should buy if it's something you're interested in doing.
So that's it. So that's how we turned $25,000 into $250,000. There was no magic tricks. It was pretty much just being strategic about where we bought,
Mhm.
having to live somewhere, and then taking advantage of the opportunity that was there. So hopefully you found this helpful. Of course, if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to either of us in terms of any questions about loan programs, in terms of where to buy. Of course, we have great real estate agent friends as well we can put you in contact with as well, specifically in SoCal in Northern California.
Mhm.
With that being said, of course, like and subscribe as always. And until next time, fam.